So as Greg mentioned, my name is Rachel Owen. I'm a doctoral candidate here in natural resources, and I study soil ecology, but that's just a way to say soil health, I think, in natural ecosystems. And I'm excited to be here today to lead this panel discussion. We've got three great panelists here. First, we have Francis Thickey, and he's joining us from Fairfield, Iowa. He runs an organic row crop and dairy operation there. We also have Josh Payne, and he's here from Concordia, Missouri. He's a former English teacher and recently has moved back and started working on his family farm again. And then we also have Debbie Korse, and she's here from Charleston, Missouri, and she'll be able to talk about her row crop operation and then some of the conservation management that they've incorporated there. So before we take questions, we're first going to have each of the panelists give about a 5-minute talk about the nature of their farms, size, the crops that you have, any other commodities that you have on your farms, and then also why you got interested in incorporating soil health and how you see that as a part of your farm. So Francis, would you like to start?
Testing, 1, 2, no?
Hi.
Is there a switch on here? Try this. This one?
I'll switch you. There you go. We'll have it. We'll figure it out while you're.
All right, thank you. As mentioned, excuse me, I got something in my throat today. I have a crop and dairy farm. We milk about 90 cows, and we have about 730 acres that we do some cropping on. It's all organic. I moved to this farm in 1996, started with 176 acres. And this land had been in corn and soybeans for many years, and tilled constantly, and it was hilly land in southern Iowa. And it was really badly eroded. Some places all the topsoil was gone, the A-horizon was gone, down at farming the subsoil. And the waterways had gullies up to 4 feet deep. So we patched those gullies, and we planted the whole farm into a diverse mix of grasses and clovers and for grazing, and set up 60 paddocks. So the cows get fresh grass twice a day after each milking, and they move around. So we like to let the grass regrow, and then, of course, grow a root system to help build the soil. The three principles that I like to think about for my cropping and grazing system. One is that to have something on the ground all the time, cover on the land all the time. The second thing is to till as little as possible. And the third thing is much diversity as possible. And of course, within each of these, you can optimize as well. So on our grazing area, I think we have a pretty decent system for rebuilding the soil, and we're starting to see it come back. And I like to let the grass grow a little taller if I can, so I get deeper roots and get more mass growing in the soil, more carbon in the soil. Now in the cropping system, what I've been doing more recently is using a roll down cover crop, planting a cover crop like rye, rolling that down in the spring, and then planting a crop like soybeans into it. And I see I'm just getting started on that because I over time bought more land and added to the farm size, and so I'm just getting going on the cropping, but I'm very excited about that as an option. Always having something in the ground, rolling down cover crops, letting them grow tall, 6-7 feet tall cover crops, rolling them down flat. And after the soybeans are harvested in the fall, you still have that mass on the ground. So I think it's a quick way to really build soil health.
Yeah. Thanks, Francis. It's fun to hear some connections there as I talk. I'm not an organic farmer. I farm probably 60 miles to the west of here in a town called Concordia. I used to be an English teacher. I farm with my 90-year-old grandfather right now. And it truly is a partnership. It's kind of a fun deal. It's not just me saying something or him saying. We get to make these decisions together. And as of about 5 years ago, it was kind of like your farm, Francis. It was completely tilled. It was conventionally tilled, and it was a straight corn and soy rotation. Now our farm looks very different. We've experimented with integrating some livestock, some different places, thanks to actually several people in this crowd who've told me that I should do that. We do a 4-way rotation. We have corn, We follow corn up with cereal rye, just like you're talking about. We roll it down in the spring. We plant green into that, which enables us to only use the chemical clethodim actually to kill as a grass herbicide. So then we plant and we use one post application of some kind of a broad spectrum herbicide. So then we have corn, rye. We've reduced our chemicals into soybeans. So we have corn, soy. We've flipped that around and do soy because I like to make money and wheat doesn't make much money. And then we follow that up and we plant wheat. We follow wheat with a big biodiverse cover crop mix, which we then graze sometimes depending upon where we are, and then we flip that whole cycle. Kind of the fun thing, I've got to know some people here at the Agroforestry Academy. This next year we're going to do some alley cropping. We're going to plant some chestnut trees, some cider apple trees, and we're also going to steal a page from J. Russell Smith's tree crop book, and we're going to plant a big silvopasture that's going to be kind of based upon that and offer some grazing options, because my grandfather took out all our trees about 60 years ago. So we have no shade, no fences, any of that stuff. So I'd like to have kind of a launching spot. My favorite question is actually why do you start doing cover crops? It's a really interesting intersection between GPS technology and extreme nerdiness in a realm of theology. So my tractors now drive themselves, right? And so that allows me to read books and while I'm driving tractors. And one day I was reading this book by a theologian named N.T. Wright, who talks about this, like the purpose that we have as people, and our role of bringing health and healing and restoration into the systems that we're in. And so that I realized I was in this tractor, and I realized I have this really important job, and it's not just about making money, it's also bringing health and healing and restoration to the soil there. So that's been a good entrance into cover crops. It got me started, and it actually kind of propels me and keeps me going even when there's failures or something doesn't work. So
This one works. I come from a farm in southeast Missouri, down by Charleston. We're about 3 miles from the Mississippi River. My grandfather settled this farm in 1911, so we were over a century farm. My husband and I graduated from the University of Missouri and had thought about going on in academia, but my dad wanted to retire from the farming operation, so we thought, why not? And at that time, soybean prices were pretty high, so we did that in 1974. Of course, we inherited a lot of old-style farming practices with, just tilling to get rid of the weeds. And we, later on in 1991, we decided we would go the no-till route. So we've been no-tilling on 780 acres since that time and have seen a lot of benefits from that. We also have 100 acres of woods on this 1,000-acre farm, and have all of our generations have saved that woods, and it's a swampland mainly, and a lot of it had to be drained, so we saved that woods that we didn't drain, and we have a lot of hardwoods, and we really enjoy our woods on that property. We've had cover crops on our farm for about 7 years. Now my son farms that farm. He's a 4th generation, and he is 100% cover crop right now, and as I said, we've seen a lot of benefits from that. The no-till is not pretty farming. My dad, when we first started doing it, he said it's ugly farming because he was so used to seeing that worked up dirt, which is so pretty and smells so good. But it saves not only in cost, because the machinery you have to have and have to use, and diesel you have to put in it to go over that ground over and over. You make more money by doing no-till. I think we have seen some years some increase in our yields, but that's not the main reason we do it. If it's the same yield, then we still think we're gaining something. Since about 6 years ago, we retired from that operation and decided we wanted to raise cattle. So we bought a farm in Wayne County, and we've learned a lot about raising cattle. We have 600 acres of 300 acres of pasture. We have 36 paddocks. We do the rotational grazing. And I think we've brought a lot of our knowledge from the row crop farming to the pasture health. We really have. When we bought it, it was terribly overgrazed, ugly. The cows were in the creeks. I thought we'd made a huge mistake, but with the help of all the government agencies, we have fenced out all our creeks, and we've planted 14,000 trees for the riparian barriers, and we've seen a large improvement in our pasture land. So I have some aspects of both types of farming that I've learned about.
Thank you all for that. My microphone's not working now either.
One out of three here.
Well, I was going to go back to Debbie because you had the microphone, but now we'll come back down here to Francis. So all three of you have cattle in your operations, but Francis, you specifically have a dairy cattle operation. Could you talk to us in just a little bit more detail about why you decided to go with dairy cattle and how that works both in the pasture rotation, but also in your management rotation? They require a lot of time, from my understanding.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm in Minnesota, and then I went off to school. I became a soil scientist and worked as a bureaucrat in Washington for a while at USDA, and then came back farming. Actually, the farm that we bought in Iowa, it was at that time the only farm in Iowa that processed milk on the farm. So they bottled milk on the farm, and that's kind of got my interest. It was a little ahead of the curve, and it was in the early 1990s. And one of my colleagues at USDA, when I left, an economist, he took me aside and said, everybody's quitting that on-farm processing. This is going to be a disaster. But anyway, it's worked out well for us, and we marketed all locally, basically. But the key thing, I think, with a grazing dairy farm is to try to make it very efficient so that we have lanes, and all we have to do after each milking is drive up with the four-wheeler and open the next gate. And the cows, they follow us out. They know they're going to get fresh grass. Sometimes they run for it. And then they go in, we close the gate, they harvest their own feed, they spread their own manure right where it needs to be, and they enjoy their work. And so so the thing is that you make them do all the work, and then we come back in the evening, we open the gate, and they follow us home, and we milk them. So the key thing is we're always looking for ways to make it more efficient so we can not have much more to do to manage it. And now, as I have more cropping land, I'm trying to integrate the cover crops into grazing, so I can graze them some and then use them also in cropping. So that's going to be kind of fun to work on that.
Thank you. Now we have a second working microphone. All right. So Josh, you also mentioned that you have recently planted chestnut trees, and you're going to be starting a little bit more agroforestry practices. So could you talk to us a little bit? I think that's a unique perspective that you might have here that the group might like to hear, is on why you decided to start growing tree crops and how they work in your management.
Yeah, so that's not actually quite true. We were supposed to plant trees this last year, and we had a EQIP grant through the NRCS, and my grandfather, I remember at 89, he vetoed it, like after it went through the whole process. So we were supposed to have trees this last year. Now we're in the process of doing that again. But the fun thing is, it's been a chance to really build consensus between myself and my grandpa. And I also got to meet some really neat people. There's actually several people here in Agroforestry Academy that I was in. And I guess the way I would have set it up last year probably would have failed. And so it's been fun to kind of work back through that and talk to experts, get to know some people for that. And so that's been actually a good thing. I was pretty mad at the time, but this isn't even on, is it? It is? Okay. I was pretty mad at the time, but now it turned out to be a really good thing for me. Probably the reason we did that when we decided to go and to pursue that, I think it goes back. Where's Amelie? She was talking. Did I say that right? Right there. Yeah. So you showed a really cool graph earlier that talked about species diversity. It says you have even monocultures with cover crops has very little diversity. But then as you go up that curve, I'd like to be able to introduce perennial grazing. I'd like to really get into the diversity of agroforestry. So that was kind of the initial step. Some of the soil cycling or the nutrient cycling, the living roots in the ground, those things really came into play. Another part of it was economics. So simple chestnut math. If you can get 2,000 pounds of chestnuts and you can sell them for $4, which is a fair assessment, right? So that's $8,000 gross, and I can gross maybe $600 on corn. So the way I'm thinking of that is that's a value-added spot. It's a place for not that, but my silvopasture is a place for a launching ground, so I can send cows out into the other parts of my field, my row crops. And the biggest thing is I want a spot for my kids to come back to the farm. I realized that if they're going to do that, I'm going to need to make more money so they can come and be a part of that. And I call my strategy getting bigger by getting smaller. If I can take small areas and make them intensely profitable, then I can then create a spot and a job for my kid. Or from my kid. I've got 3 of them now. I'm so sleep deprived that I forget how many children I have. But I think then the last thing is trees are just really beautiful. I've been given a beautiful farm. My grandpa's maintained it well. He's kept it clean. He's kept it organized. It has a beautiful view over the backside, as Rob Myers always talks about all the time. And I want to take that next step in making this a beautiful place. Oh, and then one more thing. Sorry, I talk too much sometimes. I think like one of my big passions is the urban-rural gap that I see is growing. Like people in rural areas have a hard time talking to people in urban areas. People, and it crosses just urban-rural. It's liberal and conservative, and for me in theological realms, like that same thing is there. And so I want my farm to be this place of intersection, to be a place where row crops, big farm, big industrial ag, can then turn around and meet small backyard permaculture production. So for me, like all those kind of come together in agroforestry.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I'm going to ask one more question of Debbie, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience here. So Debbie, you farm along the Mississippi River, and my best friend farms in Iowa along the Mississippi River, and she deals with some fairly marginal soil, pretty sandy, low organic matter. Since you've started practicing no-till and cover crops, have you seen any tangible increases or changes in your soil test results or your yields? I know you mentioned yields, but how have you had that? How has that experience been on your farm?
We have now. Our soil is gumbo. We have a heavy clay. We do have some loamy soil. That's our best soil, but our soil right next to the river is gumbo. But the organic matter, since we've been no-tilling, has increased from 1.5% to anywhere from 4 to 5%. So we use soil tests a lot to make sure we're doing the right thing, and so. Now the sandy soils are in our county, and they're the western part of our county. And I don't know what they do. I mean, they do a lot of irrigation and they do a lot of tillage, but the wind erosion is the biggest thing that I notice from the sandy soils. You know, you drive along the highway when the wind's blowing and you can't see very well because it's just blowing away the topsoil. But I don't know what you do. They need more tree screens, I would think. But in our soils, we don't have that problem. Plus, we no-till. And we roll down the ryegrass before we plant, you know, no-till planters and everything. So we don't see a lot of that wind erosion. And we don't farm right up next to the ditches, and so we don't see a lot of our water doesn't go in the ditches and the fertilizer and the pesticides. So.
Sure. I guess with the gumbo, then, if you have a heavy clay soil, do you see? Have you seen increases in water being able to permeate your soil?
Yes, the NRCS has run several tests. They've come out and gathered our soil and put it in the square wooden things and run the soil through it, and it's amazing what it can do. The soil just goes right down, and we've noticed for sure that our crops do better in drought because they can go so much longer without rain. It's just pretty amazing.
Sure, thank you. Well, so I think at this time we can start taking some questions from the audience. While we move around, I can also ask another question of all of our panelists here. So Josh touched on this a little bit, but soil health management and incorporating no-till or cover crops can sometimes be a slow return on investment, or it's messy when you start out sometimes. So how have you remained profitable or made sure that your farm is profitable as you convert to some of these practices?
Well, for years, just two people farmed 780 acres. I mean, that's pretty profitable, and you don't have to have somebody on the tractor all the time. You know, and a lot of that too is because of the improvement in the herbicides that you can use to kill the weeds. But that's one way it's profitable, and we never intended to be farmers. We're scientists. I mean, my husband is a herpetologist and I was an ichthyologist. So farming allows us to do those things in our off time, and that's not profitable in money, but it's profitable in our lifestyle that we get to do other things. So because we don't hire anybody else, We didn't when we still farmed, but so that in that way it's profitable to us.
And Josh, you already talked about the chestnut crop and how that's going to help to make those acres more profitable for you. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would say like in our row crop operation, we're pretty dollars and cents oriented. We know exactly what our cost of production is, so we can figure out return on investment. The best thing that I can say to other people, to my neighbors, is the transition from corn into soy. Like we plant cereal rye at a decently high rate, anywhere from 50 to 75 or 80, maybe 100 pounds sometimes. And by doing that, we're able to then plant into that rye green. We roll and crimp after we plant. And we're able to then, like we literally this last year had $10 in chemicals in our herbicide program. Our neighbors, you know, we had another spot just kind of as a control. So our neighbors had anywhere between $80 and $100 or $110 in chemicals depending upon what they were using. So I can show right away a savings of between $60 and $80 per acre on that soybean crop, which then I guess you know, and then on top of that allows for a clean soybean field. I have some really cool pictures of very few chemicals on a clean soybean field, and so like it looks good, it saves money. In some situations, it yields better, as some of the research is starting to play out. So I think like that, the soybean crop is definitely what allows me to pay for my cover crop habit. So
Great.
gets expensive sometimes.
Well, I'm not like Josh. I don't really keep track of enterprises and all that analysis. I just try to have fun out there doing what I'm doing, and I try to balance, you know, so I can pay my bills and have fun and grow, do these innovative things. What I think maybe are innovative, and so I think I'm building myself pretty quickly with this new rolling down these big cover crops and so on, but it's profitable as well. But I compare that to a lot of the Iowa farmers will grow rye and they'll kill it with Roundup at about this high, and I don't think they're really gaining much. And as a matter of fact, I know somebody who's done it for years and years and decades, and his soil organic matter hasn't increased at all, which kind of shocked me when I was on a panel with him. And so I think that you guys are doing planting in tall green rye, and you're doing it conventionally. I think there's tremendous potential to do that. Just as an aside, in Iowa, maybe some of you have heard of our water quality problems in Iowa. You laugh. If you drive across Iowa and then across northern Missouri, as I came down here, in the winter time, there's no cover crops hardly. Iowa, we have 23 million acres in corn and soybeans, and about 2% of that's in cover crops. And so you drive around, it's bare and it's black, it's plowed, and so we're going backwards. Really, you know, we're not gaining much at all. And so I think there's tremendous potential for farmers to be able to be as profitable and use cover crops and make quick progress. The research shows that maybe in about 5 years you start to see some benefits from using cover crops. But I think if you really grow the tall cover crops, you can see the benefits much faster. And so we just need to just do it, I guess.
Okay. All right. Do we have questions from the audience? Start over here if there's a microphone. Yep, it looks like he's coming behind you.
I also approach life in a theological fashion, and my theology does not include the application of chemicals on the land, because that has what it does, any chemicals kill the biological life in the soil, and so you may be practicing better soil practices, but you're undermining that whole process by applying chemicals. And understand that when you roll down grasses in an organic fashion, you've got to make sure that that's thick and tall, as you've indicated, and then it will work. But if it's thin and scraggly, as was mentioned, that roll down method is a disaster because the rye comes back. You know, it's got to be rolled down at a certain stage so it does not regenerate. So that's my comment, that theologically we're on the wrong path by trying to solve our problems through chemical applications.
Well, I'm not sure there was a question there, but I know that it sounds like Josh has reduced his chemical inputs quite a bit. I don't know, Francis or Josh, if you want to comment on the crimping.
Just
that you
you're
do.
right about the fact that you need to do a good job with the crimping, and you need to have enough biomass to make it work, and you need to crimp at the right time. But even sometimes I've crimped when I knew I didn't have enough biomass, and that's where I come to, I'm going to see how it's going to work. Some of it, I have some with a lot of biomass, and it worked really well. I knew it wasn't going to work as well, and I have a reduced yield, but I still pays for itself. And there are other things we can do. I'm looking at now, if I can afford it this year, there's a new company in the U.S. making an electrified weed zapper. You can drive down. It's about a 30-foot band width, and you can drive right above for example, the soybean canopy, and it'll electrocute all the weeds that are taller than the canopy. And so if you do that twice, like a week apart, you can basically have a weed-free field. So there are some things we can do that are going to be on top of what we're doing that are going to help a lot. And so it's a constantly evolving thing.
So, and as to the theological perspective, I think that would be a really fun conversation for you and I to have individually, probably, because I'm assuming that was directed towards me. But yeah, I think there, because like I would say the opposite. I would say that there is room for chemical use, and like especially wise, prudent chemical use. But again, that's probably going to be something we're going to disagree on, and it'd be a good conversation to have.
I think we had a question here.
Yeah, I have a question for all three of you. If you all had to start over again today on your operations, would you do it the same way, or what's the big bang that really got you all going forward, your biggest success?
Debbie, would you like to start with this one?
Well, yes, I would do it the same way. I would have the same life that I have, because it's fun being outside, working with plants and animals all the time, and we've seen so many advances in the agricultural farming industry and livestock industry in my lifetime, and I wouldn't do anything different. I don't think. I maybe started no-tilling earlier, but we were young, and back then nobody no-tilled. You know, it was I remember the first time we went to Milan, Tennessee, to the place where they were doing no-till for the first time, and it was mainly for soil erosion. But we went several years in a row, and we were hooked on that. Not for the soil erosion part, because our land's flat as a pancake, but just for the efficiency of it, I guess. So no, I don't think I would do anything different, but I've enjoyed what we've done.
Boy, what a good question, Greg. First of all, what was the big bang success was there? Like, that was the first time that we planted soybeans into that cereal rye. So a big part of my process was convincing my grandfather that this was a good thing to do. You know, a very conventional farmer. And so that started in the gardens. Like, I started kind of small in the garden 7 or 8 years ago, just doing some small trials so that he could see it. But man, that first year that we put that in and that worked and our field was clean, like that was and I think that's something that can be replicated across farms. That's a pretty easy one for corn and soy farmers to do. And so like I was really helped by a lot of people who kind of told me some systems. I stole everything from Dave Brandt, basically. Like, what I do is Dave Brandt. He's very organic-ish, I think is what they call him. And so in some ways, I kind of got in late enough that I maybe avoided some of those early mistakes. Maybe I think what I would do is more personal. Sometimes I approach life through a very arrogant. Maybe I think maybe I know this is going to work, and so we're going to try this. And I think maybe I would have had more sensitivity towards the farming practices and the history and the tradition that my grandfather brought with him. So I know that sometimes I caused pain and hurt in his life. So maybe it's more personal there. So.
Well, I first started farming organically in 1975. But I went to college first time and got a degree in music and philosophy in the late 60s, early 70s, and was a kind of a protester about everything. And so it was natural. It was natural that I was going to try to do it organically. And we had a lot of stumbles at first, but we learned a lot. And then I went back and became a soil scientist. When I was working USDA in Washington, my brother was one of the early adopters of grazing for dairy in the Midwest in the 80s. And he talked at a lot of conferences and so on. So I kind of watched that. And then when I came back and bought this little farm in Iowa, I brought him down and he helped me set up my whole paddock system. So I started out with a bang right away, working really well. So that was very helpful.
Is this on? Okay. I'm one of the things that I'm curious about is how you interact with your neighbors and what are your farmer networks in terms of receptivity, and if you're seeing some change over the last few years.
Since it's here, I'll start. Well, going back to 1975 when we started farming organically, we weren't perceived very well at all by my father and my neighbors and everything. And so it was, but it was okay. You got to have a thick skin. And so, but now in Iowa, we have the Practical Farmers of Iowa, which is not an organic group, but it has a lot of organic farmers in it, and a lot of innovative farmers doing tremendously, interesting things. And so we learn from each other. We have an email system. Everybody's constantly emailing what's working and what's not working if you've got a question. And so we have a tremendous support group. And going to conferences and hearing other people talk. So now it's different. Now people, like organic farmers. It's kind of unusual.
Yeah, so as usual, the answer to that question revolves around my grandfather. So he's been the guy that's been known for the cleanest fields, the cleanest soybeans, the perfectly plowed and eventually cultivated, other things like the perfect fields. He's been the consummate farmer for 60 years in our neighborhood. And so our neighbors interact with us in a way that says, well, if you can convince Charlie Payne, that's his name, if you can convince Charlie Payne to do this, maybe we should think about this. And it's been kind of interesting because the other farmers in our area, as opposed to, like in some places I've heard they're kind of opposed to it. They say, well, if you can get Charlie Payne to do this, we'll try it. And so you see these little experiments cropping up, and like Susan's from my area over here, and there's probably 70% of the people around have tried it. Have tried something, which is kind of a neat deal. So it all goes back to Charlie Payne, I guess.
I agree. We were the first in our area to do the no-till, and we were right on Highway 60. And my dad went to the coffee shop, and he caught a lot of heat over that. He said, "Your son-in-law and your daughter are crazy. What are they doing?" They didn't think we could farm that way, but with our science background, we thought we should try it. We researched it fairly well, and it worked for us. And there are more now in our area that are doing that. There's still a lot of tillage in our county, but there are more and more. Plus, the government's pushing it and helping it and everything else. So it's a lot of farmers are hard people to deal with sometimes. They're tough. They think they know everything, and so it's hard to get them to change. But it's starting to change.
Can I throw one more? Like my grandfather and I's favorite pastime when stuff's growing in our field is to sit at our table. We can see the road because we're on a major highway, and we will see people drive down the road, and they'll stop and they'll back out and they'll get out of their truck and they'll take a shovel into our field and they'll start digging around. It is fun to watch. So.
Okay, it looks like we have another question over here.
Yeah, it's for the lady on the right there, Debbie. Is that correct? So you mentioned about planting trees, which is great. I'm a forester. That's my background. So I love planting trees. But you also mentioned that you have a lot of native stands of trees on one of your farms. Yes. But you're leaving that alone and not really managing it?
We did the forest stand improvement on it.
Okay. I was just curious if you'd elaborate on that.
Pass the mic back.
Okay. And the other panel members could comment on that because it's sometimes interesting that people will plant trees, but then a lot of times they don't necessarily manage their native forest that they have, which also has some tremendous value and potential through long-term management and sustainability. So just curious if anybody else wanted to comment on that, if you wanted to make some more comments on your long-term objectives for your woods that you have.
Yeah, my grandpa got rid of ours, so I'll pass the mic down.
Well, I've got, it's an interesting question. I've got about 125 acres of woods, but it was all logged out and it's all scrub. It's not good stuff, so I need some help on that one. But as far as grazing, we do flash graze some of our creeks. We have a lot of creeks going through our land. And some studies at the University of Minnesota, at Minnesota, DNR and so on, they found that you can actually enhance the biological life of the stream by flash grazing. You stabilize the stream banks. You're in there for like a half a day, and the cows. They stabilize the stream banks, and actually they improve the aquatic life, which is kind of surprising. And I do that at night. I flash graze at night, not in the daytime, because if you graze in the daytime, they'll lollygag in the creek. But if you flash graze at night, they'll graze the banks, and they'll lie down on the out in the flatland, and the other land. So you can manage. You can manage it. Some people are saying, what? Well, as a matter of fact, a friend of mine from Minnesota, he was at a restaurant, and he overheard some DNR people bad-mouthing the farmers for grazing in the creeks. And this guy had a really good system. And he went over to that DNR guy, and they had a big argument. And the DNR guy came out to his farm, and he showed him what's happening. And they started to study it. And you could see that where he grazed intensively, flash graze, the bank was stable, it had grass on it. And then he studied it more and more, and he started to see that segment had actually better aquatic life because of the way it had shaped the banks and so on. I don't know all the details than others. And so they actually, you can do it if you do it right.
Okay, what other questions do we have? Oh, we have one back here.
This is a question to Debbie. Sorry. Yeah. So I know you have been one of the pioneers in your region to start no-till, you said. And having a farm of 1,000 acres and going to no-till, I can imagine how much you have to first convince yourself to start that, because yours is the bread basket, you're from the bread basket. Okay, my question to you is, you also said by adapting no-till, one of the being innovators, you were able to build the soil organic matter from 1 to 2%?
From 1.5 to
4%, you said,
to 4 to 5%, yes.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. And can you tell me over how many years you were able to build that to that level?
We've been no-tilling for 27 years.
Oh,
so,
okay.
But the
That
improvement, the largest part of the improvement was in the first 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good to know. Thank you.
I would just like to mention one more thing before I lose this microphone. We're working with the NRCS right now on our cattle farm to plant cover crop in our warm season grasses. We think it's the perfect venue for that because warm season grasses is dormant in the wintertime, and so we're going to do a pilot program to try that.
While we're waiting on the next question, Debbie, I was wondering if you could follow up with this, and maybe Francis and Josh also, but what programs do you specifically utilize through NRCS? Can you talk about that?
We've done it all. We've done CSP, CRP, EQIP, forest and improvement. We have fenced out a lot of areas around our creeks. We've done it all.
We're working through the cost share program, and then also EQIP for the trees that we're going to put in, or we hope, right, Lauren?
So we did some equipment. We put in lanes, stabilized lanes, and one thing we did with equip is on the highest hill of the land on our farm, I put a 6,000 gallon tank, and then we have a 3 acre creek, pond below, and I put in a solar panel and a pump to pump water to that tank, and then it gravity feeds to all the paddocks. We've got 60 paddocks, and we have a pipeline buried an inch pipeline about 8 inches deep, and so it gravity feeds to all the pastures. Because in southern Iowa, we don't have good well water, and the farms are basically on city water. We call it rural water. It's piped out into the countryside, so it's very expensive. And so this works really well. I have it oversized so it can fill that tank in one day. And even when it's cloudy, the pump runs, it's a DC system, and it'll run slower, and it'll keep up to the cows drinking even on the cloudy day. So that's one thing we do with EQIP that I think has been working pretty well.
Okay, great. I work with a lot of farmers in western Kansas and Texas and New Mexico, and I know that questions about EQIP and other programs come up often. And so if you have questions on those, please feel free to ask these guys. I don't know if there's going to be talks later on in types of cost share programs or other things like that, but it was a question I had, so I thought I'd ask it while we were waiting on other questions. Okay, are there further questions from the audience?
This is for the Iowa farmer. you mentioned about your livestock, your dairy herd, and your pasture. What species make up that pasture that you have out there?
Well, it's basically cool season grasses and legumes. And I'll throw in things like chicory too sometime and so on. But I tried a little bit of warm season grass, and the problem is that fescue is a invasive. And by the time any warm season grasses got established, the fescue took over. And I would like, I know in Iowa at Iowa State University, they've done some research on grazing warm season grasses, and it's pretty good for beef cattle. For dairy, it's not maybe as well. But so I basically have a mixture. I try to make it as diverse as possible, and then fescue tends to come in over time. And when I get too much fescue, I will winter the cows there. I'll do what people now call bale grazing. I put bales out, and every time I put bales out, I put them in a different spot. So by spring, that area, the whole field or the whole pasture has been covered with manure and residual hay. And now I've been trying to do it very intensively. I'll come in and I'll put bedding out. And I try to have that whole field where they are wintering covered with a layer of mulch, every square foot if I can get it. And then I let that sit for most of the summer, and it kind of percolates, and it'll kill a lot of the fescue. And then I'll come in like in the fall, or maybe midsummer, put in sorghum Sudan grass, and then I can graze that, and it'll soak up some of those nutrients too. Or maybe then after that, I can come in with rye in the fall, and I can graze that in the fall and in the spring as well. And so I try to keep it out of perennials for 1 year to deplete the seed bank of that fescue, and then I'll come back eventually and I'll plant my diverse mix again of grasses. And then after that treatment, I built the fertility up tremendously, and it got tremendous productivity after that. So that's a way to build my farm up piece by piece.
Okay, I've got another two-part question. One, you mentioned, I think, in the beginning speech that you had like 60-some paddocks out there, and you rotate the livestock every half day or something like that, so they're into fresh grass continually. How did you build all those paddocks? As far, did you have every fence builder in Iowa up there, or what happened next? And
it's very simple.
Also, I got a question on that. You mentioned about the pond and the water and the solar panel, but you only had it buried 8 inches deep, and I'll guarantee you 8 inches deep is not deep enough in the cold we had this winter.
Right.
So how does that water system work too?
Yeah, let's start with that. I started in the spring, and it goes all the way to like usually November. And then I used to blow it out with an air compressor, start in one end and blow the whole thing out. Now I just, one year I didn't get to it, and it didn't freeze anything. I mean, it froze it, but it didn't break anything. It's polyethylene pipe. I was surprised. So I haven't been even blowing it out anymore because it's easier to fix 1 or 2 little breaks. But I don't use it in the wintertime, of course. Yeah. And as far as the paddocks, I have 3 groups of cows going. One is the milking cows, one is the dry cows and bred heifers, and one is the yearlings, and they're all rotating in different places. And often I'll split those paddocks in half. They're about 1.5 acres to 2 acres. And so when it's really growing well, I'll give the milk cows, 90 cows, a half a paddock in the morning and the other half in the evening. But the thing is, in the spring, the grass grows really fast in this early summer, and then I need to rotate quickly. And so I'll take some of the areas and I'll make hay on them for winter feed. And then as it gets hotter and drier, the grass slows down. And so this is where people make a mistake with grazing. They'll start growing faster around. Each time it's shorter and shorter and shorter, and then that's where they burn their grass out. But what you have to do is add more area in. So then as it gets hotter and drier, I slow the rotation down, maybe like 30 days or 40 days or even 50 days. And then I graze further out. And in the fall, when it's cooler, I can graze. I usually have hay fields further back that are too far to walk, maybe like over half a mile. But in the fall, they can walk that easily. So then I can extend the grazing season in the fall till like December by having some stockpile grass further in the back of the farm. Did I answer all your questions?
Well, I was
Fencing.
still had that question
the
on the
fencing.
paddocks.
Yeah.
How did you get that many paddocks?
I use 14-gauge wire and little 4-foot fiberglass posts. So I can build fence really fast. I can build, in a day I could build the whole thing almost, And it's easy to, they're basically permanent or semi-permanent, but we can move things around if we need to. And then we also have some polyethylene wire and rolls. We can make temporary fences out in the back parts of the farm and so on. So we got it set up so we can build fence pretty fast, but most of it's permanent, semi-permanent.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question over here? Does anybody have a microphone right now? What other questions do you guys have for our panelists? I think we have one in the back there.
Has any of the panelists tried prairie mixes for your cattle? Or and if you have natural areas like that? Because I know that sometimes the Department of Conservation works with landowners, and they can hay prairie plants for cattle. Just want to know if you have any experience.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I tried to plant some prairie plants, and the fescue kind of overtook it. But I'm not ready to give up. I think that I would like to try again, and maybe I just need to get rid of the seed bank a little more first, and then plant the prairie plants, and then maybe I could graze my young stock in there, my dry cows and my bred heifers and so on, which don't need quite as high a quality of nutrition, and so I could manage it better. Now, with what I understand with grazing prairie plants is that you got to watch out. You don't want to graze it too hard or too early, and you don't want to graze it too frequently. So you need to maybe let it grow more mature and then graze it like a mob grazing kind of system. I think maybe Greg would want to talk about that. But so I think you need to manage it differently than what I do my cool season grasses, because the cool season grasses can be grazed more frequently. So I would like to try it, but I haven't really done it.
I just want to mention that they do it a lot in the cold southeast Missouri, and there is a lot done in the in high lonesome prairie. I don't know. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of experience. There are lots of experiences about that, and the Department of Conservation will have different mixes. There are so many native plants that maybe you can find your own mix that works for you.
Thanks.
Yeah, the warm season grasses, especially in Missouri, I think have a great place on any grazing operation. And that's because in July and August, when it gets really hot and fescue lays down, goes dormant, what are you going to feed your livestock? And so I don't think you want 100% of your farm in warm season grasses, because you got to have something for your winter, your cool seasons. But we have, we've been doing practice grazing now, or managed grazing, for 17, 18 years. And we're finding that the warm season grasses are starting to come back and reappear. And that has come apart because of the way we're grazing. We're giving longer recovery periods. We're not coming back to that plant so quick. And so the warm season grasses have a chance to express themselves. And so we're seeing big blue stem. That's the biggest one. We're really excited about that. So these are plants that are just coming out of the soil bank. We didn't plant them. So with good proper grazing management, I think it's amazing what's down in that soil. We're even seeing it in forest, where we're doing agroforestry. We're going and taking some of the trees out and thinning them. There's big blue stem coming up in that timber. Now, that tells me sometime in the past there was probably some prairie plants there.
Thank you. I work in wetlands with incredible seed banks, so I can understand this concept.
Just one comment I want to make, though, along with this, is that you graze fescue, and my Jersey cows will not eat fescue, period. And if I forced them to, they wouldn't give any milk. So with beef cows, you can do that, and so it's a little bit of a quandary for me.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, here's another question here.
I hesitate to speak. I already spoke earlier, but in the absence of anyone else, my experience, and I'm not a technician when it comes to farming, but I have thrown some of the blue stem prairie grass out into my fescue areas, and since I refuse to use chemicals to kill that, I have noticed that the blue stem will crowd out the the fescue. And I wanted to ask if you've noticed that effect. If you can get it started, I mean, it's a bit of a difficulty, but once it gets established in little spots around through the fescue area, it will it crowds the fescue out.
I'm surprised. I haven't seen anything crowd out fescue so far. And the problem I have with fescue is that the cows won't eat it, and so everything else they eat, and that grows up and makes a seed, unless I can control that. So I'm surprised. Greg, have you found out that
Yeah, on certain fields we have seen that for fescue actually has got a lot of pressure put on it by being blue.
wow, that's exciting to know.
Not on all of that, but some of them, yep.
Great.
It's putting pressure on the
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one here. I noticed that you all were talking about using roller crimping to terminate your cover crops. I don't grow row crops, but my father does, and he uses chemicals to terminate his cover crops. I was just wondering about the transition and resources that you use to make that transition. And you talked about how your costs went way down, but I was just wondering about other benefits.
Yeah, so this is actually, I was thinking about Greg's question. If I had to do anything again, I would get a pull type roller crimper. So we started off thinking that we would put the roller crimper in front of our tractor, and that we would then go plant and plant. We tried that for 1 year, but we have terraces and we have curves, and it just kept pushing everything, and it became hard. And then I heard somebody speak at a conference that says that they, so let me back up. So the problem with rolling and crimping is if you roll one way and come back and plant up against it, I end up with all kinds of chains getting wrapped up, and it becomes a problem quickly. And then I heard somebody say that they roll after they plant, and that changed the game for me. So if I had it all I would get a big roller crimper that I could, like a big pull type drawbar roller crimper, and it works really well to go afterwards. Is what we found, to roll after we plant. What we've done, we actually, we still use our roller crimper. We put a sprayer on there, so we're able to spray as we roll. So we put just a little boom sprayer that I welded up on there. So that was a good option that eliminates that other pass. So.
A quick follow-up on that. That's correct. That we found out too. We plant first, then roll, and what people have been finding is that you can wait till the soybeans are up about this tall and still roll, which kind of shocked me. And they say no damage. I mean, at the University of Wisconsin, they're doing it, and they've studied it, and they say it works. So that gives you a lot of options. You can come in there and you can plant earlier than before the rye is really at the stage where you would roll it, because you have to wait till it's at anthesis or flowering. And then I found that if you roll then it'll plug up your radiator, because all that pollen in the flowers will just plug it very quickly. So now what we can do is we can plant a little bit earlier, and we can roll a little bit, just a little after anthesis, after the flower's off, and then or we can wait, and the soybeans can come up, and you don't want to get them right when it's coming up with the crook, or you break its neck, the soybean. But so we have a lot more flexibility with that. So I haven't really tried that, but I want to wait and try it again when the soybeans are taller.
Yeah, and the other thing that a lot of people talk about, and we actually saw some of this last year, there's a vole problem. Like, we had 15 acres that they ate every soybean in our field so we had to replant the thing 3 times. But it was also the field that we didn't roll. And there's a guy over here, Doug Peterson, he's going to talk later. He actually, I talked to him a little bit, and he's like, look, voles like quail habitat. They like cover up top. They like to have room down low. And so by rolling, we've actually found that we've had no vole pressure in any field that we've rolled. So we roll our corn ground, we roll our soybean. So we roll everything mostly to help protect against those voles. So now, I don't know that that's been scientifically proven. If you have questions, ask Doug. He's way better at that than I am. So.
Do we have more questions? Oh, Mike is coming.
Has anybody ever done any experimenting? I see some people starting to use the big row crop flame weeders instead of the herbicide for knockdown on the grasses. Anybody done? What's the name of that place down by Clinton? It's between Clinton and Harrisonville. A big company, they just recently kind of moving over toward more organic practices. And that's one of the things they make is a big row crop flame weeder that will go between the rows.
Flame weeders, yes. They flame the row, right? And I haven't used them, but you can shoot right at the base of the plant like corn, and it won't kill the corn, but it'll kill the new weeds. You have to have small weeds, but you can flame weed. I haven't tried it, but people are doing that, yes.
If somebody would pay for me to try it, I would try it.
Which is great, but I kind of like the idea of the roll down thing, and I've done a little bit too with planting hairy vetch and rolling it down, planting corn in it, and so I want to do a little more of that. The flame weeder sounds good and it works, but then you got more, fossil fuels, and all you're burning at your tractor, but you're burning it behind you on the flame weeder. So I try to look at a little more of an ecological solution if possible.
So I was told we could go a little past 12, so I know we're cutting into lunch right now, but it's a long lunch, and so I've been told we're okay to keep going. So are there any other questions for the panelists?
I just have a real simple question. I live in a city, so is there anything in particular that city folk misunderstand, or anything in particular you'd want to tell us?
Looks like Josh wants to start.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I live kind of a double life in my. It's kind of weird. In my backyard, we live in town. My grandfather still lives on the farm, so we have this wonderful permaculture food forest in our backyard. So we're experimenting with upper layer, mid layer, lower level stuff. So I feel like that's a very urban kind of trend. But one of my favorite activities is to go strike up a conversation in Chipotle. I love to do this as a GMO corn and soy farmer, right? And it's fascinating. Like, I'll start talking to people, because Chipotle is non-GMO, and I'm okay with that. That's good. But I'll say, they'll start talking about non-GMO, and they'll say, oh yeah, that non-GMO corn is grown without chemicals. And I'm like, hey, wait a second here. No, do you know what it takes to grow non-GMO corn? And so like that's a really interesting topic for me to be able to then go in and talk and inform and educate and do that in kind of a neutral way. I think the other thing that would be interesting to talk about, it would be a good conversation to have, would be the effects of tillage. So what Francis is doing as his organic farm is really good. He's trying to limit tillage and limit the amounts of that. And I've got a friend in Illinois who's an organic corn and soy farmer. And he's tilling once every 4 years. But I think it'd be an interesting topic to talk about the effects of tillage and the effects on the water cycle, the effects on nutrient runoff, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. You may be a urbanite that would know about those, but at the same time, I don't know that most of the people that I talk about don't talk about that. So,
Debbie, how about you? You've lived on a farm your entire life. What would you like to share with an urban population?
It's a different life. It's a different life, and I love to go to the city, but I will always come back to the farm. I mean, it's a peaceful life, and as I said, we spend 90% of our time outdoors, daylight hours, so I wouldn't give that up for anything.
There's something I think that's misunderstood, not only by urbanites, but by farmers and especially politicians. And in Iowa, we have this big nitrate problem, and the thinking is that it's because we have too much fertilizer, and if we can just optimize our nitrogen fertilizer use, we're going to fix the problem. And it's not that, and people think technology is going to fix it. It's not. It's an ecological problem. The problem is that the corn-soybean rotation is inherently leaky. It's inherently flawed, and people don't understand that because there are live roots in the soil for only about 5 months of the year. So during most of the year, there are no live roots in the soil, and we have all this tile drainage. And so when there are no live roots in the fall and the spring, the water comes down from rainfall and it percolates through the soil and takes nitrate, soluble nitrate, with it right to the tile drains because there are no live roots. Now, research shows that when you have perennial crops, good perennial crops, virtually no nitrate will escape. And so our politicians don't understand that they think that we just got to manage that fertilizer better. The problem is we have a flawed cropping system. It's inherently leaky, so we need to do something ecological like cover crops or rotations in order to fix that problem. And so instead we're doing Band-Aids, and we're putting these bioreactors and these, what somebody's called conservation diapers at the bottom of the field, because we haven't done it right on the field. You know, our ecology is flawed, so now we have to use an engineering solution at the bottom of the field. That's my sermon for the day, and I'll be quiet.
Are there any other questions?
Well, can I throw something in there?
Sure, go ahead.
So Francis and I we should go out to dinner sometime. That'd be kind of fun. I just invited you to dinner. Yeah, that'd be good. We can. Anybody wants to join us, we can go. But you know, I would say that we would disagree maybe fundamentally on some of our practices. But I think the thing that I've found that has been like a common bond, if you will, is soil health. Like it truly does come down to so what Francis is talking about is what we're doing on our farm, so that we can help mitigate the some of the ecological impacts that corn and soy can have. I think there's some good opportunities there for me and other farmers like me to do that well. And I think what can't happen is we can't become these polarized communities of organic and non-organic and so on and so forth. And I think that it happens. I think it happens too well, and I think soil health can really be that bond for that. Only at dinner.
Okay. Well, we don't disagree. I think we agree on a lot. As a matter of fact, I would say that if Iowa farmers in that nitrate problem area farm like you do, we wouldn't have a nitrate problem.
Are there any other questions? That was kind of a very nice note to wrap up on, how soil health brings us all together. But if we have any more questions, we can still take one or two more. I don't see any. All right. Well, thank you. Oh, we do have a question.
I was wondering
okay.
if you are working with perennial grains or have looked into that.
So the question was, are any of you working with perennial grains, or have you considered growing perennial grains as part of your rotation?
I mean, I've looked into it, and like the yields are kind of low. They're pretty tight with their seed. I would love to look into that in the future, especially as a part of my, because I have the equipment to do row crop, to do grains, to do cereals. And so as I'm planting my chestnut trees and as I'm alley cropping, I think that would be a really good fit. If that can then be proved to be an economically viable situation, I'm sure it can be. So I would like to try that at some point when that becomes available. But I don't know. I don't think it's there yet, so.
Debbie, do you have any comments on this one? No. Okay. I don't know where Gregory's at. All right, so we will go ahead and wrap up. Please join me in thanking our panelists.